Hi there, it's Lisa Starr, and we are here with another episode of StarrCast. Today, we're going to be talking about design, but in particular, design and wellness and how they go together. I'm very pleased to introduce our first guest, who is Robert Henry of RDHA, Robert D. Henry Architect. He's the founder. Robert, and we call him Bob, has been doing architecture in wellness and spa and salon and hotel and hospitality for I don't know how many years, he'll tell us, but welcome and thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Lisa. It has been a long time, 34 years. I would say of that, probably 25 years have been focused on wellness design. And what's interesting is a lot of people ask, well, what is wellness design?
I
And
love that you have
basically,
that on your website, by the way. Your homepage is fantastic when addressing that.
oh, thank you, because I think it does need to be explained, and often people will ask. And basically, it's architectural and interior design that focuses on the health and well-being of its occupants. So we've been focused in that area for quite some time, and we're sort of having our day now. I mean, post-COVID, wellness is on everybody's mind. So just designing healthier environments, promoting health and longevity is where it's at for us.
This was something that your firm did before COVID, however, right?
Well, of course, we started, about 25 years ago
Mhm.
with a few pivotal projects that basically put us on the map for that.
Which were
Um,
what?
one of them, I'm unfortunate, I can't really talk about, but the other
Okay.
one was a very high grossing day spa for a gentleman, Carmen Di Pasquale,
Mhm.
in New Jersey.
Mhm.
And
I know it well.
it received quite a bit of notoriety, in part because financially he was the most successful per square foot day spa in North America. And then we did a resort project as well. And both of those were best in class. So we garnered considerable attention.
Mhm.
They were very different and different audiences, and yet they were both very successful.
So the firm has been focused on wellness architecture, and then COVID comes along and it sort of gives you a boost, but you were already in that space. Uh, let's talk about the design sort of timeline because these projects take years. I mean, I'm sure when COVID hit, you had things on the drawing board already. And what happened to those? And did those projects morph at all in more of a wellness direction as a result of the pandemic?
Well, it's interesting. Good question. The Governor's Island project that we did in collaboration with QC Termi out
Mhm.
of Milan, that took actually 7 years. So this started well before COVID, and it took a couple years just for permitting purposes. So
Mhm.
every imaginable agency, federal, state, local, New
Yeah,
York
the
City,
military in on it,
landmark,
right? Yeah. Yeah.
it just had every possible permitting procedure in place, and it really did take us a couple years just to get through the permitting process. And it's probably North America's most ambitious project. It's about 100,000 square feet, 76,000 interior space in three landmark buildings on Governor's Island that was originally designed by McKibben and White. So they're very famous New York architects at the turn of the century. So we recycled those buildings. And the owners were very interested basically in just bringing what they have in Italy in terms of a wellness experience in all these hydrotherapy pools and interesting interior and exterior treatments to the US and do it in their Mediterranean way. And that's been very successful for them. They've accomplished that after 7 years.
Yeah.
Um,
I've
about,
visited it and it's always so busy. It's amazing. It's a great facility to be outside in the pool and looking at Lower Manhattan, even no matter the weather. It's amazing.
yes,
So
yeah,
well done, you.
oh, thank you. And they've been getting a lot of attention. I think we're working on a phase 2 and 3 for them, and it's sort of like they want to basically double their capacity, and they can
Already.
handle about 250 guests per period, and they're interested in doubling that to about 500, which will be a whole campus of wellness, if you will.
That'll be
About 3
amazing.
buildings and outdoor pools and a number of different outdoor areas, outdoor cafe. It'll be very exciting.
Well, it is great to combine the inside and outside spaces in the way that you've done. It's very nice and speaks to wellness, right? I mean, people want to have fresh air now more than ever. Um, so in terms of wellness design, I'm looking at the aspects on your website: air quality, water quality, energy conservation, sound mitigation. That's great. Material selection, optimum systems, environmental impact. And on each of these, you have an explanation. So it's a great place for people to go and learn about wellness design. How did you and your team learn about it? Because no one was doing it.
There was a lot of research and projects that, with each project, I would say, enhance your toolbox
Hmm.
in terms of wellness. And each location is different. I remember doing a project a number of years ago in mainland China, and it was in a first tier city where they're experiencing real pollution issues, where the children couldn't even go to school. So there we implemented a salt inhalation room, and that was hugely successful, right? So you're addressing a real health concern. And when we can grapple with people at large or a location that might have particular concerns and or individuals, it sure makes a difference, in terms of their
Hmm.
quality of life. Sleep issues has been
Hmm.
very topical for a number of years, especially for both urban and non-urban, people. So it's really trying to get the heart of what is going to make an impact in people's lives.
Hmm. Beyond just the walls and the floor and the lights, right? I mean, what are the first wellness components that you try to introduce?
Well, we really look at the site and what nature has to offer, then you don't have to really work so hard.
Mm.
So often we will do passive design where we're using eaves and overhangs that protect from direct sunlight or allow that sunlight in depending on the sun angles. We'll take into consideration natural breezes, vegetation, all these things we really try to preserve. And we've been fortunate to work with a lot of beautiful natural environments. Uh, and let's say for Amelia Island in Florida, it was an eco-sensitive island. We preserved every single tree. So we took a rather ambitious building program, and moved a series of smaller pavilions around in the landscape and thereby preserve every tree on the property and really nestled that into the environment. Took a lighter touch, if you will,
Mhm.
so integrating nature, right? That's the salvo. That's what we try to learn from every day,
Mhm.
integrating
Do
those systems. Remember when we used to say nature nurtures?
uh-huh.
Well, it's so true.
Yeah, that's very true. So, does anyone come to you with a project and say, "Oh, I don't want that wellness architecture. Just give me the regular kind." I mean, what is people's mindset now, with you as an architect and with your customers?
It's really increasing in terms of the wellness side. I would say pre-COVID, you might run into like a 50% pushback, or how expensive, how much more expensive will it be to keep me healthy? Would you ask your doctor that? it's so there's been a tremendous shift. And in particular, I noticed that the younger generations, Generation X, Y, and Z in particular, are so health minded.
Mm.
So with them, it's a priority. And, they search out designers, architects, brands, experiences that integrate this wellness sensibility. So for them, it is a lifestyle. And that's the difference. We've seen it shift from a niche experience to a lifestyle choice in which many more informed people are gravitating towards that.
Well, that speaks well for the longevity of your firm since the boomers like us will be dying out and that they will be taking over. So, there will be work going forward. What do you think customers want? Like when they come to a spa or salon or wellness space, a hotel, like what wellness elements is the client looking for?
That's a great question. So the Wellness Tourism Association, WTA,
Mhm.
basically asked that exact question. What are wellness seekers looking for? And ultimately, it boiled down to a reboot in natural surroundings. So if you are fortunate enough to have this beautiful natural environment, I think you just take the programs like you'd mentioned earlier outdoors, even in less favorable, what we might say, temperature conditions. So there's the rise of the Nordic spa and these winterized outdoor experiences or cold water bathing. It's just interesting now how that's becoming such a focus.
Much so. I can tell you as a consultant, we're getting nonstop requests for bathhouses or more water amenities. I mean, for various reasons and labor, use of space, but it's what people want. I mean, do you as an architect ever think, yeah, but does this have legs? Like, did we really do this? Will it last 10 years? Or do you just do what your client asks you? What's your input on the design process?
Well, we love working with informed clients where a dialogue ensues and the end product is larger than both of our individual investments, right? So we really like it to be a dialogue. And we find that our best projects are really about that wonderful dialogue. But if you can bring a lot of the programs outside and integrate, let's say, treatments that correspond with that, let's say exercise recovery, or we worked recently with Mohonk Mountain House, and they have, I think, about 600 miles of trails through nature, and they are known for some of their climbing cliffs and things of that nature. So why not put a rustic pavilion located in the woods that you hike out to and
Hmm.
then get the best reflexology and foot massage of your life, right?
I love that.
So, right? It's just like marrying the nature with the experience, with the modality and treatment, and bringing a real benefit to people. And
Mhm.
those that exercise a lot, that exercise recovery coming out of athletic industry, right? And football with the cryo and this, uh,
Compression boots and
yeah, that all's really effective. The ice, it used to be the ice baths that a lot of the football players would take, for inflammation. We're learning so much science and just couple that with our needs, and I think you've got sort of that magic combination.
so a lot about nature, Bob. People want nature and they want air and trees and flora and fauna, et cetera. But what do you do inside the space to make it a wellness space? Well, let's say you're in an urban environment, you don't have, a park outside. What are some things you can do in terms of wellness design to hit those buttons?
Well, it's so interesting looking just at your backdrop.
Hmm.
Uh, it has what appears to be this grotto, right? That was
Right.
carved out of a cliff, and then you have a series of pools and lounging spaces there. So often we're recreating spaces that borrow and use materials of nature, right?
Mm,
So we'll work with locally harvested stones, timber, slate, and we're surrounding you in as much of a natural environment as we can.
mm. That makes
So,
sense.
in essence, it's sort of recreating nature the best that we can, but nothing does a better job than nature. So, um, does that,
Natural surfaces, the way it looks natural. Does that carry over into sustainable building practices, or is that a separate sort of silo?
they're really one and the same. So, it shouldn't surprise you that natural materials are the best materials one can use. Um, and if you don't have to, let's say, transport them very far, you're saving on carbon footprint.
Mhm.
It's really working with local materials and cultural conditions and what's in your own backyard.
Mm,
And then that also will reinforce the uniqueness of place, where when everything just becomes the same, I mean, why travel, right?
right.
I think it's really capitalizing on the sense of place.
That's a great way to look at it. I mean, guests want local authenticity, especially in travel, and so using stones and woods from the area certainly crosses uh, that to do off the list, as well as being sustainable and as well as being wellness oriented. So ticks all the boxes. Any other design trends you could share since COVID that maybe have crept into your normal practice?
Just that we're really busy as heck, and it involves almost every type of residential and large scale, small scale projects. In a real recent interest in terms of, I would say, legacy projects where um, a family might decide to create this retreat, and that's meant for generations to come, and just creating a healthier environment for their children and their grandchildren, right? So that's been a, also a turning point for us, where people are thinking that they're making that kind of investment and thinking so many generations in the future,
That's a big
which is very
investment, and
exciting,
building
right?
something that will last for a few generations.
Yes.
That's really nice, though. I wish my grandparents had done that.
Yes, mine too, right?
Well, I'm glad people are thinking of it now. So you're seeing more sort of long-term planning, you would say. People are not building just for right now, they're thinking about the future.
Yes. So they're integrating um, environments that they feel will enhance their personal wellness or their exercise, putting in a saline pool,
Mhm,
which is really good for your skin versus the chlorine, or reducing the amount of chlorine, and realizing how that provides health for generations to come, and
mhm.
teaching your children how to swim. So there's a whole progression uh, and utilization that's more long-term thinking.
Bob, you mentioned earlier about price. I mean, does wellness architecture cost more, or does it need to cost more? Has that difference between the standard approach and wellness shrunk? Like, what can someone expect to pay if they want a wellness designed building?
It's all a question of degree. And certain systems are very inexpensive to implement, as I was saying, in terms of just knowledge and passive design. And other things can be a little bit more costly. So and post-COVID, it was all about fresh air exchanges. And in four climate or four season climates, heating up that cold air from the outside and bring it in, dealing with these more hybrid mechanical systems can be a little bit more expensive in terms of increasing that air exchange, but that's what we realized was most important. So technology is constantly trying to address real-time concerns, and there's been a lot of advancements regarding mechanical ventilation and the importance of that, especially in like classrooms or large gathering environments. So the costs are coming down. But it's
That's
true.
good to hear.
We'd say sometimes anything that's costing within 10 to 15% increase, and yet can have energy savings within 5 to 6 years. Most people will feel that's value driven and conscious and a smart decision.
I don't think so. I mean, if it takes 30 years to realize the gain, maybe not, but if you can realize that within 5 or 6 years, why not? Hopefully people are thinking more long term, as you said. So, in terms of wellness design, you don't see this going away. Like, is this the way of the future now for all architecture or architecture, processes?
Absolutely. There's a higher consciousness, there's a willingness of the younger generations to demand it, not request it, but they have these expectations. They're voting with their pocketbooks, if you will. So in their wallets. So it's like it's here to stay. And there'll be a heightened focus like on EVs, right? Electrical vehicles. There's a lot of focus now in alternative that are much healthier for the environment and individuals. So you see this around every corner. It's an
When
exciting
COVID,
time from that
oh,
standpoint.
sorry, when COVID came out, there was all that UV light, right? We're going to use UV light to kill germs. We're having UV light at entryways and UV light in the laundry. And what, I mean, is that still something that you see happening, or was that just of an in the moment practice?
There is validity to that, but the air exchanges and the whole distancing and everything else was far more effective. And if you're in a conducive environment and not in an enclosed environment, the reduction of contacting any virus, is mitigated tremendously. So yeah, a lot of the original myths have been displaced with real hard science.
Well, it's good. We do want to follow the science. I mean, I think in the first year of COVID, we were just grasping at whatever would allow us to be out and about, but a few
That's
years
right.
of data is very helpful.
That's right.
So, Bob, what's your dream project? If someone came to you and said, "I have unlimited budget, you can build whatever you want," what would it be and where would it be?
It's not about the money. It's about ideally finding this beautiful location in nature that people would love to visit, and then create an architecture that really takes a lighter touch. It's almost invisible, within that nature, and really complements the environment and doesn't detract from the environment, but enhances it if you can and will. So I would say, a lot of the most beautiful locations, Costa Rica, Hawaii, finding these beautiful natural environments is, for me, the primary driver. And then just doing the most sensitive architecture that we can to support that environment, not destroy it or take away from it.
Well, I want to close with remembering something that that you and I were both part of that has something to do with architecture, and it was in Kunming, China. We were there for the Spa China Summit. I arrived in the middle of the night, and they brought me to, I mean, it's, you fly to Beijing and then you fly to Kunming and then you have a 40-minute drive to the resort. And I think I got to my room at 2 a.m, and it was a magnificent villa. It had its own pool. And you had similar, right?
Yes.
Amazing outdoor space, indoor space. You could sit in bed and the blinds went up and down with the push of a button. But the surprise was what we found when we got up in the morning and we went outside and opened our blinds. Do you remember? Across the way was a power plant.
Oh, yeah.
It was just so incongruous because you're in this beautiful resort, and it's the kind of thing you don't see in some countries, that kind of proximity of, that development of a beautiful luxury resort next to a power plant probably wouldn't happen, but those things do happen in some countries. And it was just the funniest thing to get up in the morning and go, what is that? I don't think it was even a half mile away, and there it was. So
It was across the lake and it was a nuclear power plant. And I noticed somebody swimming in the lake very early in the morning, and I was hoping that he was going to be okay. It was really jarring. As soon as you mentioned it, it just, the memory came flooding back. You're right.
Yeah, that was really funny. We sat around the pool on the last night at my villa and we looked at the power plant. Interesting experiences one gets when you travel. Anyway, Bob Henry, thanks again so much for joining us and for contributing your wisdom, and keep building beautiful places out there that we can all appreciate.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Lisa. You have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you. Okay. Hi there. So now we have our next guest, Bryan Dunkelburger, who is the principal of S3 Design. Bryan and I have worked together several times over the years on test fits, and he is a specialist. His firm is a specialist in spa and leisure industries and doing the design and the layouts for them. So I thought it would be great to hear from him on what his thoughts are on where the industry is going. Thanks for joining us, Bryan.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So, Bryan, you are a designer by training.
Yes.
And when did you decide that you wanted to become a designer?
High school, actually. I had a really great art teacher, was really involved in the art side of high school. And my mom's a teacher as well. And she went to my mom and said, listen, I love art, but he should really try something that's more technical. She encouraged me to take some technical drawing classes in my later side of high school. Loved it and decided to go to college to do either interior design or architecture. And I eventually ended up on the interior design side, and I've loved it since.
That's great to have that encouragement at a young age, or somebody that spots that talent in you and could direct you.
Yeah, it is. It is. And then finally, what's really funny is I don't think I really knew it until well after, when my mom was such close friends with that teacher that she even had that conversation with the teacher. It was something my mom was like, oh yeah, when I had that conversation, and I'm like, I don't even know what conversation you're talking about. But yeah, she was a great teacher, great artist, teaching young kids. And, I think it was really sensitive of her to say, look at something that you can use your art skills and your technical knowledge of stuff. And, I know they always, there's always the cliche of the starving artist. I don't think she wanted to be the starving artist. She wanted me to be a starving artist. So it's been great.
Well, young people today don't always know their career options, and it's nice when someone like that takes the time to notice things about you and can say, hey, there's a spot for you, that you may not have known about. And you're not being like a chemistry teacher or something, you're doing something that you have passion for.
Yeah. It's great because when I got to college, I was like, everyone goes to college not exactly sure what to expect. But it didn't take me long to go through a couple studio classes and be like, oh my gosh, I love this. Like, this is fun. Like, I remember calling my parents one day and saying, I do this for peanuts. I was young and stupid at that time when I said that, but it was, but I think it just went to show how much fun that was. And I thought this wasn't really work. This was actually enjoyable. And even to this day, I come to work and I don't think that it's work. I think I get to do something where it's creative every day, and we get to, yeah, you have problems you got to solve, but that's part of the challenge, part of the fun part of it.
Well, that's awesome that it's worked out that way. What was your first job, Brian, out of college?
So my first, I kind of have two real different segments of my career. My first one, I worked for a generalist firm that did a lot of corporate. So I did a lot of corporate office space, a lot of, yeah, mostly corporate office space, a lot of lawyers, accountants, business stuff, from everywhere from like, Fidelity Investments down to, a law firm. But in addition, coming out of high school, I was really into sports. And one of the guys I worked with went to another firm that did sports as part of their practice. And that colleague called me up and said, "Hey, we have this opening in our sports practice for an interior designer. Would you be interested in coming and talking to him?" It took a little bit, but they convinced me, and with a lot of kind of nice, like, look, you can marry your love of sports with what you do from design. And I'm, for anybody out there, making a job switch is always, especially when you're going to a slightly different part of your career, it's a little bit scary. But I took the jump, went over to them, did sports for.
So when you say sports, like stadiums, like workout facilities?
Yes, it started out as at that time in the industry, college rec centers were really big. They were really late 90s, early 2000s, were really becoming popular on the college campus. It was changing from like the 1950s gym to something that's more like a health club. So really cut my teeth on just learning how locker rooms function, flow of facilities, how people move through things and what they see and what they don't see. So it was anything from like rec centers to athletic venues to small stadiums. But what's interesting about all of those things, and even with the spa sector to me, is it's all about the experience, right? Like how you move through the facility and what you experience directly impacts how you feel about it, whether it's a good experience, whether it's a good feeling. And so all those things were really good, I'm going to say design-like lessons for me. Had some really good mentors at the same time that were really supportive. And then eventually that firm came to me and asked me if I wanted to do health club work. And in the health club work, so at that point I was excited to try something even new, and it was kind of my own. So we did some heavy marketing. We landed some projects for companies like Equinox, which are super similar to the spa world, where it's a lot more about the finish. It's a lot more about the high-end nature of it. It's a lot more, it's really focused on the experience. And then eventually in 2008, we said, I have a business partner, and we said, I think we can do this better on our own. Jump ship, started S3. It's funny about that is people say to me all the time, like, we should do it again. And I laugh because I say 100% I do it all over again. I'm like, the funny part, and anybody who's thinking about starting a business, I would say the thing for me that was interesting looking back was that the things that I thought I should be scared of turned out to be not that scary. It was the things I didn't know that became the scary things, right? But the good news is you don't know that when you jump ship and you do your own.
You're not afraid of things you don't know about.
Yeah, right. And once you're in, right? You're doing it. So, but all good. And then when we started this, then we had some other opportunities to do spa work. Met people like yourself, and I think, and realized that market played really well with how we viewed
Mhm.
design in general, in that it is really about the experience. It's about developing a space that really resonates with the clientele. Um, I don't have data for this, but I know that there is anecdotal data that people come back when they are in spaces they like or when they have good memories of.
When they feel comfortable and at home.
Yeah. So we try really hard to do that. We try really hard to make it something that people just have really, really good memories of. And, you know, even in our design process, we talk with the operators about the services. Like, what are you providing and how do you want to provide it? And what's the best environment for that to be provided in?
Mhm.
You know, I think some of the best feedback we've gotten are when people say things like, my gosh, I go to these places and it feels like home, or um, it feels like I've always should have been here. Like this
Mm,
always have been part of my life. You
that's
know,
high
so
praise.
yeah, right. I mean, you don't think about it when as going into a designer, but like in the end, you're really trying to impact how people um, feel about things, whether it is art or it's a space, right?
Well,
So
I'm trying to think back on when we met, and I think it was one of those hosted buyer events, maybe, and you were there as a vendor, and I was there as a consultant. And when you did some fit outs for me, I was struck immediately by your grasp of like what has to happen, because so often when you get a designer or an architect, they're all about the impact and they want to make this great looking space. And it may be great looking, but it may not work, you know, for the purpose that it's built for. It may not be functional or ergonomic for the staff. And you always got that. You like totally got that, all in which I was so impressed with. And in your designs, always consider how something will be used, not just how it will be looked at, which probably speaks to why you create comfortable spaces.
I appreciate you saying that. It means a lot, actually. We try really hard. I will tell you, I think if I had to say a behind the scenes part of our design, I would say that I don't want you to fight the building or the space, right? As an operator, you shouldn't be, it's, it disheartens me when I hear some walk through in some ways, like from the day we opened this, it's never really worked for us. Like, I feel like whoever designed that did a bad job at that point. Like, I feel like the space should either, whether it helps you sell, whether it helps you get through treatments faster, whether it helps you move laundry faster, like, like I think that's one of those things that like there's tons of laundry, right? Like it's gonna go
Yes.
somewhere, right? And also just understanding, I know this kind of sounds cliche, but like what's on stage and what's behind stage, right? What do
Mhm.
you not want your clientele to see, you know, is equally as important as what you want them to see. So yeah, and I think, a lot of that's, and like I said, working with folks like yourself is great because you also kind of you've been around the industry long enough to know the design side, and we take constructive criticism really well, right? So
You do.
if you start saying, Brian, that's not going to work, or that's not what we're trying to do with this part of the operations,
Mhm.
like, I'm not going to, it would be arrogant to fight you on that. Like,
Mhm.
that's not the goal. Like, the goal is that whatever your client is our client, our client's your client, and we both want to walk out and the client be like, that was an amazing,
And
that
we
was
created
amazing.
something really great that has, legs on it, and it will function for us really well.
Yeah.
So, what could you speak to what you think some of the basic design ideas are when you look at a spa or wellness center? Like what ethos do you bring into that initial creation of something?
So the first thing is always flow, right? Like when someone's coming through, where does your experience start? Does it start in the parking lot, or does it start when you get off an elevator? Like, where does it start? And then what are you asking, the clientele to do first? Is it you're checking in? Will they be waiting? And if they are waiting, what's that environment feel like? And then, are we moving them to a locker room? Are we moving them to a treatment room? Like, where are we moving them in the flow of the facility? Once we kind of figure that out, and then after they're done with their experience, what's that experience coming back out to when they leave, right? You don't want to operationally, you don't want to drop the ball between that point leaving, and architecturally, we don't want to drop the ball. Like, we don't want all of a sudden to be seeing the laundry room, like, because we didn't think that through. And then once we kind of get that basic flow, and I think we know enough about the basic flow, then I think it really starts to get into the operations, right? Like, really making sure that whatever moves we're making architecturally are supporting operations and aren't making a challenge.
What kind of things can a client give you to help you in that thought? Like, do you like to see the menu of the place, or do you like a brief on what will happen there? Does that help the design process?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, more information is always better to some level when it comes to that. Like, if you're really, really focused on treatments, then okay, what treatments are you doing? What support do you need for those treatments? How do you want to do a dispensary that everybody goes to and takes their technicians take stuff out of, or do you want that stuff in the room? Like, understanding that helps us kind of in that planning process. And somebody might, there's lots of reasons for it. Someone might be like, the turnover of rooms needs to be faster, so we need to stop closer. Others might be, no, we're really encouraging people to linger longer. That's part of our experience. So making sure if that's the case, then then from whatever they came here to do, leaving, we want to have more areas for them to relax in, or we want to have more areas for them to, just wait for someone else they came with, right? It's not like a big relaxation room. It's more of a nook, because somebody else's treatment might be 20 minutes longer.
Sure.
Things like that. I think knowing that those types of things, knowing turnover, how fast you're trying to turn over certain things. Like, again, like, you don't want, and sometimes that impacts the locker rooms, right? Like, because you want to make sure that the locker room is efficient, but you also don't want to make sure that the locker room, that people aren't there for 40 minutes or 50 minutes after the treatment, right? That just kind of clogs up that part of the process. So, like, I'll give you, I mean, this sounds super simple, and I'm not creating anything like that anyone's like, wow, that's revolutionary. But like, in the locker room, you have sinks, and then getting your dry vanities away from the sinks, or close to the sinks, but away from the sinks, just allows someone to groom when they're not using a sink without taking a sink.
Absolutely.
Just, simple things like things that
Like
those
having that dry grooming area so they can step aside for the next person, because the sinks cost money and the plumbing costs money, and you don't want to have more than you need.
Yes, it does. And it's time, right? It's just, if you're coming out to wash your hands after you use the restroom, and there's somebody standing there blow drying their hair, that's the sink that gets taken up. It doesn't need to be taken up, right? Like that, but that's like also setting up, if you're going to provide a hand dryer or a hair dryer, provide it at the dry vanity, don't provide it at the sink.
No, and it's an awkward situation for the guests, which isn't a great memory for them when they leave, right?
No, there's other things like in locker rooms so I'm going to key in on exactly what you just said. I know when your space is tight that you tend to want to put, for health and hygiene reasons, the sinks right across from the toilets, right? And space is tight, that happens all the time. But whenever you can, you want to separate the toilets from the sinks, but so that when you leave the toilet, you have to pass the sinks, because nobody wants to be standing at the sink hearing what's happening in the toilet.
Good point.
Right? They don't want to smell it. They don't want to hear it. Like, that changes your experience, right? So, if you can afford the space to separate those things, but yet have the path from the toilets past the sinks, you're still encouraging good hygiene, but you're making that experience at the sink a little bit better.
That's a great tip, Brian. So what are you seeing in design elements? I mean, spas have been going to more sort of the sustainable model, and we want to see more natural stone wood. I mean, are you seeing that from guests across the board?
I think, yes. It's funny because I think that the sustainable side of that is a little smoke and mirrors. It's
Well, I'm
not,
thinking of them in two separate venues, to be honest, like sustainable in the terms of the materials used or the cost or the recyclability, but then you've got the look and feel that's evocative of a natural setting. And I think they're two different things, right?
they are, and I think you can marry them really well because I think, and you can absolutely, can and should be married. But I sometimes feel that they aren't, right? Like they're done for two different reasons. I will say there's nothing, I think the calming nature of nature, like whether it is a natural stone or whether it's the feel of something that you're touching, whether it's a material that's on the chair or whether it's the countertop, like there's something very relaxing about nature and being in it. You know, it's interesting that we're even talking about this because I always found it weird. I didn't understand why really expensive homes got built on the ocean coast, right? Like if you really just look at the ocean coast, it's like flat horizon line, right?
Right.
But then after just years of kind of designing and looking at things, I think that there's this inner human thing that makes you feel comfortable when you can see expanse. I don't know
Like
what it is.
safety, I can see far, so I can see my enemies coming, kind of thing.
I don't know. Maybe it is like a you actually might be onto something. I actually feel like there's like something about that, right? There's something about whether it's an ocean looking at the horizon or it's a mountainscape or there's something deep kind of, for me, it's like in my chest, it's just calming, right? Even if you're watching, a thunderstorm come across a mountain range, it still has this serenity component to it, right? So I do think that as you start thinking about design of spaces, if you have the luxury of having vistas, you should capture those. If you don't have the luxury of vistas, understanding how nature feels when you design should be something you should aspire to.
Well, it's so impactful to see nature or to see a nice view, right? And that often is of nature. I'm thinking of about 2 weeks ago, I was in Rome and I had lunch at the Bulgari Hotel. It recently opened. They have like a 5th floor terrace. It's got a wall around it, but in front of our table, they had cut a hole in the wall where there was this beautiful view.
That's
And it was like so Italian, right? And so nice. And it was a hole. It wasn't like a lot of work.
yeah,
But
yeah,
they framed the view beautifully.
yeah. That's clever and very cool.
Well, views are good. What else would you say you're seeing in terms of spa and wellness center design? Any new trends?
I think there's still a lot of recovery stuff. I think that's still kind of an evolving modality.
When you say recovery stuff, you mean the evolution to touchless or low touch services, self-help?
I think more just understanding the healing qualities of the body. I think we we see this even on the health club side where understanding that things that spa industry would have said, heat, cold, heat, I think is becoming more mainstream and more people are expecting it, which I think is great.
Agreed.
I think what's really nice about those types of things, I think you can point to scientific stuff that this is really helping.
Oh, they have a lot of evidence on contrast therapy, on sauna, on cryotherapy, all of that now.
Yeah, and I think that's just making more informed decisions. And I think as products are developing with that, it's a lot it's a lot more attainable for
Mhm.
the general public. I think that's great. Um, I think there's just more studies on a lot of different health therapies. Like,
Mhm.
I mean, if you think back, right, it wasn't too long ago that acupuncture was still seen as kind of voodoo medicine, right?
Right.
And yet now there's more science to show that there's legit
Mhm.
things here that we didn't understand before that are actually really healthy and should be either explored for different people and different conditions, but it's helpful, right? And I think you asked the future kind of stuff, but I think in some ways, I think we're finding the past and
Mhm.
and making that, and it's not voodoo stuff. It's not mysticism. It's actually there's science there. We just didn't know the science.
Right. It's Eastern and Western medicine realizing they can coexist. It's not one or the other.
Yeah,
It's both. I think it's interesting that you are seeing the health club sort of evolving to the same place the spa is, right? Which is having some services that are self-catered, that are what we would call recovery oriented. And because the health club and the spa are, continuing down this parallel but merging road.
yeah. Well, you're 100% on it because I think the the faster you can recover, the better the better results you can get, right? Like even if you just similar, like if you don't have to leave one environment to go to another environment, or another business to get recovery, or you don't, or likewise, if you're a spa operator and you have programs that are whether they're stretching or whether you have other things that are kind of dipping into the health club side, but you realize the health benefit of those, and you can get more at the facility you're going to, you're more likely to come back,
Mm-hmm.
right? Once you start to
Yes, and that helps in so many ways, including lowering your marketing costs overall. If you're not constantly having to attract new guests and you can get repeat guests, that's better for everyone.
yeah, 100%.
How would you say it's changed since COVID, Brian? Have you seen design changes as a result of COVID, or do you think we're kind of going back to where we were?
I think we're sliding much closer to where we were.
Mhm.
I think 2023, 2022, a little bit, because people were still kind of apprehensive in 2022, but 2023, towards the end of it, we saw people really just sliding out of it, more back to where they wanted to. I think people got to a point where they realized they liked going back to what it was before.
Mhm.
Um, I do think I think COVID gave people just a general, I'm going to say, a better awareness of maybe things that before they didn't recognize were more germ prone.
Mm.
But I think, you know, we we have I think we have a very strong immune system for most of us, which I think we maybe took for granted during COVID.
Agreed.
But I do think that we're a little bit more sensitive to our immune systems right now. So that's probably due to COVID. And I think that I think if we really start looking at things more holistically, the better health builds our immune systems, right? So, I think ultimately we're probably a little wiser, but I think that we're kind of back to where we were.
In the design perspective.
Well,
It's
design-
interesting to hear that. I think that COVID, we always say we got a COVID lift in the spa industry because things we had been telling consumers for years were important, like to get massages, to lower your blood pressure, to take care of yourself, to build your immunity. They finally said, oh, okay, I get it. And it used to be that those expenditures were really discretionary, like only for special occasions. And we are seeing now that consumers are not cutting that. They are still getting their massages, their facials, their self-care because it makes them feel better and it makes them feel like they're stronger.
Well, and they probably are actually, right? Like
Mhm.
it's actually probably working. You know, I've always, I have 3 children, and I've always said to them that your perception of your reality is probably the most real you're going to get, right? So if you're actually doing something that makes you feel better, then you're going to be better,
Mhm.
right? And I think, it's, yeah, these are all great conversations because I feel like this is how we have conversations with clients, right? We're not just what tile do you want on that wall? It's more
Right.
of a, let's really talk about like what you're trying to do. And if I can get the architecture to do that and help you do that, that's what I want to do. Like
Mhm.
that's what that would ultimately be the end game, right?
Well, people think, why would I spend money on this architecture, design? And then when you see great design, it's like, oh, this is what, I mean, it all makes sense. It tells a story, it delivers an experience, and it does it efficiently. And those are all really useful things, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. It's
So
funny
what
because
do you,
go ahead.
oh, no, you go ahead.
It's funny the way you said that because I actually feel like the best design, the, aside from like when you start talking high-end design, like you notice that, right? But the best design, the simplest and best design is the toughest design to do.
Let's see is what you're going to say, right?
But you ultimately don't see it as much, right? Like
Mhm.
you really, like as designers, we look at spaces that are really simple and clean, and I have people who work for me, and they're like, we should do spaces like that, and I'm like, that's really tough to do. Like
Mhm.
to get that clean is admirable, but we have to deal with sprinklers and we have to deal with
Mhm.
mechanical systems, and
Right. The
you know
guts
this.
of the building. It has to work still.
Yeah, and there's codes that you're like brought in, like, oh my gosh, the exhaust at manicure pedicure that you have to
Mhm.
deal with
Mhm.
is, and how close each jurisdiction wants it to the treatment is, like some of these things are just, they really bog down that clean and pure look that you're going for. So
Mhm.
you got to be really smart and savvy about how you deal with those things.
Yeah, especially in the US where we have so many codes and so many guidelines. Well, in closing, Brian, what could you speak to the next 5 or 10 years? Like what do you think will happen in terms of spa and wellness design? Any trends you see coming or things continuing the way they are?
So I, I don't have a crystal ball, but I will say I do think size. Um, as all of these things, as more things kind of, we as a species, I feel like we have trouble letting go of things, right? So
Mhm.
oftentimes things that you probably aren't using as much stick around your facility. And I think as we start finding out more and adding more, the size of your facility starts to grow. So, and I think, and some of that's really good stuff, right? Because like I said, you get more under a roof, you can do more, you have more patrons that come in and they can use
Mhm.
more, and if you're a really savvy operator and you can cross-pollinate your uh your segments, your modalities for revenue, and you can encourage them to either, you know, get other treatments, like
Mhm.
your spaces grow, right? And that's something I think, the spa industry and the facilities can capitalize on, and as long as it fits the business model and you're not getting too much space, I think those are all good things. I think also that um, I do think that there's with biomimicry and in design and things like that, I think you are going to see people going more to the natural stuff, even more than they are now.
Mhm.
There's more data on biomimicry that is beneficial, then that really helps the architecture side, um,
Mhm.
plays out more on the architecture side. So I think those things will play in. Um,
Using plants inside, like how,
Plants, also understanding, like, I'm always fascinated that how nature solves problems on its
Mhm.
own. We
Mhm.
we decide. I'll give you a perfect example. Your mechanical system, right? Nature's figured out how to cool. Like there's indigenous people who figured out how to cool spaces in the desert, and we decide we're going to air condition,
Mhm.
right? And I think this kind of goes back to what we talked about with Eastern Western medicine, right? It's recognizing that there were some really, really, really smart people in the past that solved problems that we actually take the easy way out, and we don't solve those. We just put in an air condenser,
Right.
which uses energy, which uses like, so I think, as people get more tuned into kind of how nature solves problems, and it's becoming more prominent, and kids are going to school for it, which is great because now they're coming out with it part of their education. I think you're going to see that play bigger roles in just architecture in general. And I think the spa industry will, because the spa industry has been so focused on wellness, it's such an easy bridge, right, for them.
Sure. I mean, creating wellness through what we do, why not do it in our space as well?
Yeah, and there's lots of stuff out there now that proves it, right? You don't have to try to convince somebody of it. There's enough information out there that they Google it really quick, and all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, this actually makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's, depending on how big the spa is, but if you do have investors, sometimes the investors aren't tuned in like the operators tuned in, or
Right.
you have to convince them, right? And if it's already kind of a bit more mainstream, it's a lot easier to convince. So yeah, I think I'm excited about the industry. I really do think that there's a lot. I think I know that you talked about the COVID bump, but I think the 10 years after the COVID bump, I think that there's, with the amount of technology available to us and the amount of being able to research really quickly for ourselves what's good for us, um, I think the spa industry has a amazing opportunity to be that resource.
Well, I think you're right, and I'm glad we both work in that field, and our future our jobs are secure for now. So thank you again, Bryan Dunkelberger from S3 Design. You're a principal. You have offices in Quincy, Mass, and in Florida. And if anybody wants to find you, your contact info will be in the show notes. So thanks again for taking time with us today, and also for all your contributions in the past.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.